Hello everybody and welcome to a video about Dwarf Fortress. This is a bit of an arena experiment, or science if you will, where in the arena I am trying to figure out, can dwarves reasonably defeat an undead giant sperm whale? For those of you uninitiated, giant sperm whales in Dwarf Fortress are one of the biggest creatures. At birth they are approximately 4 million centimeters cubed, and at medium about 100,000 centimeters cubed, and at adult size they can get up to 200,000 centimeters cubed. They live 70 to 80 years in Dwarf Fortress unless undead, making them slightly larger than a dwarf, which of course stands at a maximum size of 60,000 centimeters cubed. Now, while the giant sperm whales are very, very large, and also by that logic quite dangerous, because they are sea-dwelling creatures, they will naturally just die up on the beach. However, if this giant sperm whale also happens to be undead, they can crawl onto the surface and cause a lot of damage. So, using the arena mode, I have decked out 10 dwarves. These dwarves all have full adamantine gear and legendary skills. Now, you might wonder, can these dwarves reasonably defeat this whale? Well, if they don't, we'll have to increase the numbers. So why don't we let them at it and see how they fare. So right off the bat, the dwarves jump into the fighting. As of course you can see here, they are colliding with the whale. Now right off the bat, the dwarves seem to be dodging the whale quite effectively. They are dodging around in circles and the fighting is continuing. If we check the combat logs here, you can of course see that the majority of the red hits, which are the whale attacking the dwarves, seem to be coming up as misses. The dwarves are biting the whale, punching it, smacking it, doing their damnedest as much as they possibly can, but they don't seem to really be damaging it much. Like, I'm not seeing any blood on the ground, and I'm certainly not seeing any teeth or anything flying out of the whale. So, why don't we unpause this and see how they fare when it continues. Many of our dwarves are stunned as well as terrified, and they're all kind of stacked up in a kind of an odd way. It's a little bit difficult to really discern as to what's actually happening. Teeth scatter everywhere, which is a good sign. They all seem to belong to the whale, and the whale is bleeding, which is also a very good sign for our dwarves. The dwarves continue to fight, and bits and pieces of the whale are continuing to fly through the sky. Once again, checking upon the combat logs, we can see that the majority of the hits are landing on the dwarves' side of things. I mean, it is kind of like hitting the broadside of a bus, and the whale appears to be missing its attempts at crushing the dwarves, which is the main attack type that this has. This is equivalent of essentially like a blob forgotten beast. If you've ever seen one of those where they just kind of roll around and their main attack format is just roll onto thing and squish it, that's kind of the way these whales work. And then immediately upon unpausing, we see a bunch of dwarves just kind of get smacked against the wall. Things are definitely going south for our dwarves. There is also one body. As you can see up in the top left, it actually says the numbers alive on each side. So side one has lost one dwarf. They flew up to the top and smacked the wall. And of course, upon checking the combat logs again, we can see things kind of starting to go south. The dwarves are getting overexerted, which means the whale has the unfair advantage of simply getting to propel them far away at a high speed, which is very bad for dwarven health in the long term. We can, of course, see our first mangled corpse, more dwarves flying away, vomit landing on the grounds and bits and pieces in YouTube. If you demonetize this video, I swear I will come and request for monetization to be returned, because this is not actual graphic violence. It's just simply cartoon mischief at best. The dwarves continue to get smacked backwards, and the first round is over. So can 10 dwarves defeat a undead giant sperm whale? No. Let's add some more to their defenses and see how they handle round 2. And just like that, round 2. So I've added 20 more dwarves to the dwarves side. As you can see, there is a full set of 30 dwarves now versus the undead giant sperm whale. Of course, the dwarves do have full adamantine armor and are all legendary, and the whale is unarmed. I did accidentally give it a full set of adamantine armor, which it somehow was wearing once while I was testing, so I had to re-record this fight, actually. Let's just say it didn't go well when the whale was also armed. So I am taking the liberty to bend time a little bit, because as I started recording these fights, they began to become very long, to the point where, well, I don't want to talk about it. Anyway, as we were continuing with this fight, this particular fight I've actually trimmed quite a bit out of, because the full recording for this particular fight, round 2, was about 30 minutes. The dwarves seemed to just be kind of in a perfect stalemate with the whale. Even though they were causing quite a lot of injury to the whale, it just wasn't moving, and I thought, maybe if I dump some water on their heads, it'll break up the fight a little bit, and they'll give the whale a bit of a chance. But unfortunately, that wasn't really the case. It just kind of moved the fight elsewhere on the map. Frame rate still stayed steady at a maximum frame rate, but nothing was happening. Eventually, I just figured, well, it doesn't seem like they're going to win because they seem to just be falling asleep, so I will add some more dwarves onto the fight and give us a round 3. So I may have gotten a little bit enthusiastic with round 3. I've added 160 dwarves, once again, entirely decked out in the best possible gear, in the best possible situation for these dwarves, with maximum skills in every single facet of combat against a whale. Now, if you look up in the top left of the screen, you can see that it is the right number of dwarves, and mostly what you're going to be watching is clips of this fight at about 3,000% speed, because as I flashed on the screen, the total recording time for this particular fight is 3 hours and 45 minutes. The fight's frame rate gets real bad, as you can see, and as time kind of goes on, I eventually started to fall into madness. Initially, I was watching a movie, and then I kind of got up and left for an hour at one point and went to the garden and watered it and came home, and they were still fighting, and it was still recording. There, of course, were memorable moments where dwarves first started getting launched back around 15-20 minutes into the fighting, but from what I could tell, because until after the fight is over, the frame rate did not increase. I kind of thought it would start to increase as the dwarves started to die, but what seems to have happened is there was just so many injuries on the whale itself that I think that might have been what was draining the frame rate down, because it doesn't increase until I delete the whale at the end of the fight. So most of this fight happened at 2 frames per second. So at this point in the video, I can pretty safely say, no, dwarves cannot reasonably defeat a giant undead sperm whale without some extreme or extraordinary luck or some very strange circumstances happening, because they seem to just be locked in eternal combat. Now keep in mind, this is with fear and morale turned off, so they're not running away out of fear, but like even with it off, they still stayed locked in combat and the frame rate never increased. So a good couple of hours of recording later, and we're down to 60 dwarves. As you can see, at some point I tried maybe blocking off some line of sight with a couple of trees, thinking that maybe that would improve it, but turns out most of the dwarves were just so injured they couldn't move anyway. And the few that were fighting were just kind of locked, like they were incapable of like breaking up the fight. They were just there, and you can see fluids and stuff appearing on the ground. At a point I started pausing and unpausing and thinking maybe that would help, because the frame rate went up and then down again, but no, it stayed at a steady 2 to 5 FPS. A couple of times it spiked up to 7 and I got real excited, but no real luck there. Now, as you can see, we are down to 24 dwarves. Many more fights have happened and the frame rate just stays bad, until finally, as you see through this time-lapse footage, the last few dwarves get slowly taken out one by one. At which point, I then do the ceremonial proper finale for something like this, where I dump lava on it. At which point it then takes an additional, like, 5 minutes for the whale to burn. So realistically, if you see an undead giant sperm whale in your game, scream loudly, run away, lock the door, and build cage traps and try and trap it, because I think that might be your only course of action to actually save the fortress. As for it being a useful defensive mechanism, probably pretty good. I mean, let's be honest, releasing this thing into the wild against an army of goblins, I think it's going to win. If you'd like to see more videos like this, I've got a couple more planned. I've got some that I'm working on already. One's even recorded. If this is interesting to you, leave a like on this video. If you'd like to see more videos like this, or other videos about Dwarf Fortress, check out this YouTube channel. There's more than you could probably watch in a lifetime. And if you want to help me out directly, you can do that by picking up a piece of merch, checking out my Patreon, or jumping over to one of my Twitch streams at twitch.tv/BLINDIRL. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next fight.